Welcome everyone to the 11/5/2020 Brattleboro Democracy Forum 2020 election review and discussion, where we will talk about the circumstances we face as the votes are counted or not counted leading up to the inauguration. I am Woody Bernhard, the host of the Brattleboro Democracy Forum, monthly meetings that are all about democracy. To start out, I want to say, as I often do say, that I think that the ideal, the dream of democracy is the most beautiful example of human love that we will ever see. The goal of democratic government, all government really, is to make life better for the people. And what a glorious goal that is. We may have elections and we may have winners, but if we have people who are oppressed, ignored, exploited, left behind, and left out, if we have people who are suffering, that's not democracy. But I say the way ahead for the people of the world is democracy. I dream of democracy. And that is why I am hosting this meeting. I am pleased to welcome Tim Kipp, Stephen Van Ooy, Mary Gannon, and Nick Biddle, who will lead off our discussion. Tim is a retired Brattleboro Union High School history and political science teacher of 39 years and a political activist since the 1960s. Stephen is a practicing psychologist in Brattleboro and a socially engaged citizen. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's right.
Mary has been involved with social justice, education, and activism personally and professionally throughout Northern New England for over 30 years. And Nick is a retired professor of Latin American history and a Brattleboro resident since 2013. After Tim, Nick, Stephen, and Mary have their say, we will open the meeting up to discussion. Okay, so thanks for coming. And to start things off, we'll hear from Tim. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you all, and greetings, fellow citizens. We are all living through one of the worst daymares, I guess they're day and nightmares, that in political history that we've had. And so what I want to do is just talk about two themes briefly as for my introductory remarks, and then maybe follow up with those either with folks asking questions, or I can expound on some of these things if there's time. I think there's a lot of people out there really appreciate it. And so let me dive in here. I think we are now all on the edge of the Grand Canyon. I think we are looking over the Grand Canyon, and depending upon who we're talking to here, we are looking at two nations. This is the most divided time in our history outside of, I would argue, certainly the Civil War. And you could possibly argue, but I think it's deeper now, the 1960s, because of the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement, the women's movement, where the lines were starting to be drawn. And certainly the Civil War is the most dramatic of these eras. But the United States now has seen itself, and the world is seeing it, as though we are two nations, in my view. This is my interpretation, obviously. We are a nation was born of the color line, and I refer to Frederick Douglass and William E.B. Du Bois, who talked about the most defining element within who we are as a people has to do with the color line, because we were a country born of slavery. We are a country born of a strict caste, of slavery and exploitation. And we are feeling the effects of that today. It is though it has never left us. It is woven through the fabric, I believe, of who we are. And it is our challenge. Everyone I know that in this panel has been working all their lives to try to bridge that divide. We are divided by what I look at as a liberal / moderate wing of society versus a conservative / reactionary wing of society. And all of this is perpetuated by racial and class inequalities. And they just seem to be getting deeper and deeper. And now it's been accelerated by the demagoguery of Donald Trump. I don't think Trump is the cause, he is just the symptom of a deeper currents that have been flowing since the days of the founding of our country. It's also been accelerated by a Republican Party that has turned into, in my view, a cult, and also who are willing to ally with a president who clearly does not appreciate, clearly does not understand, nor want to understand what democracy is all about. And this is also aided and abetted by I believe, a rogue right-wing media. So all these things will come together to create these kinds of divisions. We live in a society that's really in many ways like the 19th century social Darwinian approach to society. It is a political economy based upon the survival of the most privileged. Survival of the most privileged. If you're white, if you're male, or I also like to put in corporate privilege, because corporate dominance over our political system is so evident. And we have a system of privilege that does not allow for a true social safety system like they have in European societies, in terms of education, in terms of housing, in terms of employment, in terms of poverty. We are left out in a economic wilderness to fight it on our own, and that is supposed to be virtuous. We are in a national trauma right now, the trauma of racism, economic decline, authoritarianism, and layered on top of all of that is the pandemic. And what's fascinating about this, that these seismic eruptions to our culture have not, according to what we're seeing now in terms of how the election is playing out, have not produced any monumental waves of new politics. No, quote, blue wave. I remember I don't remember it personally, but the 1932 election, when we were at the height of the Depression, Herbert Hoover was swept from office and replaced by Franklin Roosevelt because of all the cataclysms within our political economy. We don't have that today. Trump right now has more votes today at this moment than he got in 2016. So I think we as a nation have to, if we don't address that, we're not going to get anywhere unless we do. And I'll close with a few more remarks. One is I would suggest that we are in a very undemocratic electoral system. We have the most expensive elections in the world, and we also have the lowest voter turnout of any of the industrialized world. In 2016, we spent $6.5 billion on the presidential and congressional races. There are over 10,000 voting districts across this nation, 50 different systems of how we elect people to office, different registration, different voting, and different counting. And we're seeing this play out now in terrible ways. This system has spawned over 300 lawsuits to date on the federal and state level to fight for to fight for democracy or to restrict democracy. We have misrepresentation in the Senate. I came across some figures recently, says that the Republican senators currently sitting in the US Senate got 10 million votes less than the Democratic senators in in that House. And still, we have a Republican-controlled Senate. There's something wrong with that. It's called Senate misrepresentation. You all know about, and I won't have to go into it much because I call it votus interruptus, gerrymandering and voter suppression. We have 1,700 polling places have been closed since 2013. Over 30 states have extreme forms of gerrymandering and voting suppression. If these things, as we're seeing it play out now, if these things aren't addressed, then we can't expect any kind of progress in terms of our democratic future. So that's me. That's it. Thank you. Should there be applause here now? Good. Should we just go on to other
Yeah,
presentations?
Yeah, I think I think it would be good to have Nick come up and present. Are you there, Nick? No. Where is he?
Hey, Nick, you want to unmute yourself and start?
Yeah, he's here. Unmute Nick.
There he is.
Nicholas.
Nick, you need to unmute. There he goes.
All right.
Okay. So I'm on. Am I on?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Welcome everybody. Thank you. This is a big turnout, and it's because it's such a crazy and big day and set of days and period of time in our lives. Yesterday when I woke up, I had this kind of deep feeling of dejection. I felt dejected, and it was because I was pondering that, there was a election turnout record. 160 plus million people voted on Tuesday, and 80 million of them who know what Trump is, who understand his way, chose to re-up for 4 more years of that. And it left me embarrassed to be, part of the United States, and kind of, oh God, I just wanted to hide, get in a cave. And then this morning, which was such a beautiful day, and and as I said to several people today, don't you love global warming? I was kayaking, and I was thinking about U.S. history, right? And it starts as a set of colonies here to make money. They use slaves and slaughter Indians. That's what the United States has as its root base. And it develops a little bit into, the revolution. And then we get to the Constitutional Convention and that great document that we depend upon right now. The so-called architect of it generally is a guy named James Madison, we've all heard of. And Madison argued in the Constitutional Convention, and this is to contrast with Woody's idea of what government is for and what democracy is about. Madison said, the protection of different and unequal faculties of acquiring property is the first object of government. The first. Let me translate that. That means not only property, which is wealth or money, but the acquisition of property is the purpose, the single most important function of our government, and apparently our government primarily. Well, from that perspective, the people who vote for Trump, they're right in line with US history. What does it matter if a Hispanic woman's child is ripped out of her arms and thrown in a cage while she's thrown back to Mexico or wherever? American people don't blink. We have a slave complicit society, 400 years of it. We're the descendants. We're not any smarter than the people who were here 400 years ago. Our brains are the same size. We learn the same way. We're exactly the same. We have the same emotions. We're no different. And neither are Trump's supporters. So, this is America. And I'm almost surprised at my unending naivete to be saddened and shocked by the truth of America. But so be it. That's why I'm here. But now let's get back to, for me, what I want to comment on is what I think we can expect actually here forward. And from that perspective, I actually am cautiously, as we say these days, with an abundance of caution, optimistic. In June, there were about 100, a little over 100 former politicians, State Department bureaucrats, CIA analysts, highbrow folks who got together to create something called the Transition Integrity Project. And they wrote a report published at the end of June relative to their ideas about what might take place starting on November 3rd, lasting all the way to January 20, which is the inauguration. And they projected 4 possible scenarios for November 3rd, which was Tuesday. The first was that no winner is clear by dawn or by noon on Wednesday. Well, that actually happened. The second was that Biden wins both the popular vote and the Electoral College by a substantial margin, and therefore it seems he clearly won. The third is that Trump wins the Electoral College but loses the popular vote, which is how it happened in 2016. And the fourth is that that Biden wins the popular vote and the Electoral College, by a slim margin. And as we're sitting here right this second, that looks likely. So in a certain sense, options 1 and 4 of this Transition Integrity Project came true. That's what we're looking at. And the option 1, you don't know who's going to win. Hopefully, like I say, that's the thing. I'm thinking that Biden is going to slip into the Electoral College victor. In this case, the Transition Integrity Project imagine, of course, that both Biden's camp and Trump's camp will fight aggressively to defend that situation, and Trump's aggress against it. We already know, as Tim pointed out, actually on the 2nd of November, the day before the election, Trump had already leveled 330 lawsuits in 41 different states to either stop all mail-in balloting and or stop the counting of those ballots. And of course, yesterday, he got his army of lawyers going in all the states that are contentious right now still: Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, et cetera. And so his lawsuit attack is constant, and we saw it coming, and it's here. But the Transition Integrity Project had this observation, which is that this is how they put it: a close and contested election may be resolved through the exercise of power, not through the courts. The project projected, quote, both the Biden and Trump teams to pursue plausible but aggressive actions in order to win. The exercises that they, did demonstrated that the very first move by each campaign was often decisive. It established a narrative and the overall strategy. And it's for this reason that I have a little bit of hope. I was up through a good portion of the night Tuesday, or actually Wednesday morning, and because I had anticipated that Trump would announce himself victor at 1 a.m. in the morning. And instead of actually doing that, what he did is he announced that he was going to make a talk, he was going to give a speech, and he told the networks at 1 a.m. And so that was kind of, partied around there. And, networks were waiting for him to come out on stage. And 1 o'clock turned to 1:30, et cetera. Well, at 1:30, we now know from a New York Times report and also a Time Magazine report of yesterday that the Justice Department sent out a memo to all 50 states and attorney generals in all 50 states, making their interpretation of when federal marshals would be legally able to intervene in polling places to observe and investigate the process. Because as the Constitution and all laws show, or are written, elections are controlled by states, not by the federal government. So federal marshals are not allowed in an open poll. So the Justice Department had sent out this memo saying, we are defining open polls by the moments that people are voting. Whereas traditionally, it's understood that the poll is open if the poll counters are counting the votes, which obviously is still the case. And this created a little bit of a ripple at 1:30 in the morning on Tuesday, actually Wednesday morning. And 42 minutes later at 2:22 a.m., Trump walked into some room in the White House filled with his supporters and, lobbyists and family. Not a one of them with a mask on, I can tell you that. I was watching. And he got up to the microphone and said his words of, blah, 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 welcome, blah, 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 we're winning. And then once he really focused on the microphone, the first words out of his mouth were, we won't let them steal this election. This is a fraud. Frankly, we did win the election. And within a minute after that, he said, I'm the victor. I declare myself the winner. And we're going to stop the vote counts, et cetera, et cetera. It went on for 5 or 7 minutes. And then I could feel the embarrassment across the globe, across the Republican Party. And actually, in my case, it was relief, because he had demonstrated his illegality so absolutely internationally and in the most critical moment. And I happen to be watching ABC News, which has as one of its commentators, Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, who has become one of Trump's greatest or closest advisors, at least in terms of the campaign. And you might remember when Trump got COVID, Christie had to go into the hospital too. Well, there he is, and the camera kind of comes back to him, and okay, former Governor Christie, how do you make of that? What do you make of that? And to his credit, he said, that was illegal, that was ridiculous, and Trump just undermined every lawsuit that he will level against the vote count, because he demonstrated his ulterior motivation, his absolute absence of impartiality, and he just strategically made, the biggest of mistakes. And so we know that so far, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Nevada courts have rejected Trump's, efforts to stop the count, investigate the count, et cetera, et cetera. And that is the narrative that now is in place. And so I will conclude by saying, I think Biden will become president. I think we will have this every state will have a new vote count, but somewhere in the next 3 days, it'll be announced that he has won the Electoral College. And I have a feeling if Arizona stays constant and Nevada stays constant, that because there are going to be multiple states, not just Pennsylvania, that Trump would have to attack. There's too much widespread vote integrity for him to go after. So that while he'll spin it out, and this is, I want to raise this one point also about the transition project that I find very interesting. What we also imagine in the near future, if Biden wins, is that around January 10th, Trump is still in the White House, and he's making it clear that he's not leaving. That, you know, the Transition Integrity Project imagines what he'll do is he'll trade a pardon for all of his crimes and all those taxes and all of that stuff in order to leave the White House. So that will be an interesting, should it transpire, that will be, you know, his last, but you know, they're right on it. I'm sure that they're right about that. But hey, so now if we can consider whether we give a pardon or allow Trump to leave the country and never come back and not put him in jail, that's a heavy question, but I'd like to have that question instead of 100 others. And so I'll stop with that.
So who's up next? Thank you, Nick.
Mm.
Very, very informative.
I think I'll go next.
Okay, great. Great, Mary.
Just to mix up the gender voices a little.
Excellent.
Great.
So, hi everyone. My name is Mary Gannon, and I feel a lot of emotion tonight being with this group. I mean, first I want to say I'm really honored to have been asked to be part of this among some of my most brilliant, wise comrades. And also just given where we are, I think it gives me great comfort to sit with you all here tonight with my family on also. And I need to do a shout out to some friends of ours from California who are also on the call and are also, you know, happy to be in this conversation. And several of them are young people who are very engaged in the political process. One of them is my daughter, Ella. And so I think it's also our duty to, as we talk about the bad news, to also give them some thoughts about how we move forward. And so I just appreciate that we have an intergenerational audience here tonight. And I just want to appreciate, Woody, some of your words. I'm paraphrasing here, but earlier you spoke about this idea of humanity, I think. And one of the things I've been thinking about is how to hang on to our humanity. So not letting this process, not letting white supremacy culture, which I'll speak about in a minute, not letting the criminalization of democracy take our humanity away from us, that we need to hold on to that. And that also being in community is really important right now, in community with all of us who are struggling and wrestling with this. So I want to thank the organizers. I will make a few comments from a social justice perspective. So those of you who don't know me and don't know my work, I work from a very much a social justice, racial justice perspective. In my work across the state in Vermont and in Northern New England, I talk a lot about white supremacy culture. And I think about how we can continue to analyze what is happening right now through a white supremacy cultural lens, which I think is really where the conversation needs to be. And I think what's been most disheartening for me is that it's pretty clear that this election really reflects who we are as a country right now. And my 85-year-old dad walked in yesterday, and some of you know Tom, my father, and he tries to stay upbeat. And he said to me, this is a country that's divided. We are a divided country. And it was disheartening for me to hear that from my father. But with the high, and what he talked about with me was, you know, given that this has been the highest voter turnout in more than a century, and it wasn't even close to a mandate, against racial inequality and white supremacy, not even remotely close. And so for those of us who see ourselves, and I think that would be everyone on this call, as social justice workers, racial justice workers, that's pretty disheartening. And what I've been doing a lot in the last 24 hours is thinking about what does that mean for me and my work? And what is it that I'm not listening to or not understanding? And I talked to Tim about this a little bit yesterday. And one thing that we did agree on was it's pretty hard to try and find middle ground with racists and white supremacists. So I'm not suggesting we do that. I think what I'm trying to understand from where I'm also located over here in Winchester, New Hampshire, where my family and I live, we're not Vermonters, is we live in a community where in our election over here, we had some also very disheartening results, which are showing that Free State
Let's give this a minute here to see if Mary comes back.
Oh, here. Okay,
Give her a second.
where'd it go? Let me find it. Where did that person go? Oh, here.
He's unmuted. I hope Mary comes back soon.
You can ask Steve if he wants to go.
If he wants to do what?
If he
Do you have
wants
an
to go.
idea why not? What's up?
It
Well,
looks like she got dropped off the call, so she'll,
She has to get back into the meeting?
yeah, she has to get back in. I've got my eye on that. Be nice not to switch speakers right in the middle of her
Mhm.
presentation.
Can we, am I on here?
Yeah, you are.
Yes, you are.
Okay, if anybody's got from the Zoom community, if anybody has observations, questions, comments, maybe we could do that until Mary comes back.
Right.
Sure,
And
please use the raise your hand function.
And
You don't have to do it because you're not raising your hand.
Mary's
Oh,
coming
here
back.
comes Mary.
Yep, good.
recording paused.
All right, folks. I don't know where I went.
Nice to have you back.
Did you move back? Did you move on to someone
No.
else?
We
Okay.
want.
Okay. Good. My family is downstairs and they're yelling at me, telling me I'm frozen, but I was going on and on. So the other piece, a couple other points I wanted to bring up is I'm sure some of you who have been tracking this today have also been hearing a lot about this idea of how identity politics is not the winner in this election, which I have just, from where I sit in my social justice, perspective, I've found fascinating because we tend to, or this election process and these campaigns tend to use identity politics as a way to bring in voters. And the statistics I got this morning, they could be different, but I just want to read these out loud. 1 in 3 voters who identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, queer voted for Trump. 1 in 5 Black men. And then we also, I don't have statistics on it, but I was listening to what's happening around the Latino vote in Texas. And then separately from that, Cubans and Venezuelans in Miami-Dade County. So I am so fascinated with this because, and as part of what I have often thought about, as many of you have as well, is, why would you vote for your oppressor? As far as I'm concerned, this administration is the oppressor. Paulo Freire talks about the oppressor as one who often, and certainly in this situation, has carried policies and practices that are impacting the lived experience of the oppressed. And yet these folks are still voting for this individual. So that is something that I want to deep dive into and better understand. And the other couple points I want to bring up is I've been also following Stacey Abrams' campaign. If folks are aware what Stacey Abrams has been doing, particularly I think in Georgia around voter suppression. And she's really showing what it means to focus on voter suppression and how it's a form of white supremacy culture. And really understanding, someone said to me the other day that if we were to really account for voter suppression, that would be the only way that Trump would win, is through his methods of voter suppression. And we're certainly seeing that right now in the last 72 hours or 48 hours. And so I have been thinking a lot, what does this mean for our state or our New England states? I do a lot of work in Vermont. I've been thinking about what's been happening in Vermont and some of the local and state races, losing some of the Dem seats, certainly looking at Zuckerman's significant loss, and wondering, what some thoughts are about that. I mean, over here, we knew we were going to get what we like to call him Sununu. That's his name over here in New Hampshire. So we knew we would get Sununu back in office, but also understanding what this means for us locally and statewide. And I say that because for me, I have to think often about where am I going to continue the work that I do? And certainly I want to give attention, the resources that our family can, to the federal level, to campaigns, to national organizations. But one of the things I'm very concerned about is, particularly here in Cheshire County, which prides itself on being close to Vermont, is this blue wave is moving purple. And we're seeing it in some different pockets here in Cheshire County, certainly with some of the results that happened here in Winchester. And so I've been thinking a lot about what does that mean as we go forward. And the last thing I'll say is I think that one of the models we need to look at, and I don't know if we'll do this as a nation, but I know that there are places in the country who are really looking at truth and reconciliation as a way to do some healing and make sense of how we are not wrestling with the legacy of slavery. And Rwanda and South Africa have had significant positive results with these truth and reconciliation efforts. And I'd love to start thinking about how we maybe activate an effort like that between Vermont and New Hampshire, because we have some very powerful efforts already in both of the states around Black heritage trails. We have incredible work over in the seacoast of New Hampshire. There's some really important ways that we could look at truth and reconciliation. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Mary.
Very nice. So who's up next?
Stephen.
Stephen, are you
All
up?
right. I think I'm up. Thank you. Thank you, Woody. I'm going to keep this really brief. We've got 29 participants, and I know people want to ask questions. So I just want to maybe draw down to the individual level as a psychologist. That's one of the sort of frameworks that I use and engage in on a daily basis. And I just want to share that this morning I had a new client I met on Zoom, and our encounter started out with this person telling me that they felt scared. They didn't know what was going to happen. The uncertainty that we're riding on top of this COVID pandemic and now the election was extremely upsetting. A lot of fear. And as I'm listening to this person, I don't know if this person is a Trump supporter or a Biden supporter. And I appreciated the opportunity to realize that the majority of the country is experiencing the exact same thing. Fear about the uncertainty of what's going to happen in the future, and the stress that comes with that. And I think that is an overwhelming feeling that this country has, and that the majority of people are trying to protect themselves in the ways that they know how. Now, I'm not making an excuse for the people who are informed and who understand the implications of the policies that have been presented by Tim and Nick and Mary. Those are all really the where the power is playing out and making things happen. I've long been so curious about how do people make these decisions to vote for one person or the other. Back in 2013, I started going over to foxnews.com. I wanted to understand what those people were saying, because I just could not fathom how, if you watch the news sources that I watched, any human being with a conscience could vote for these to maintain the white supremacy of our country, the capitalism, greed, and so forth. And what I found by going over there was, oh, if this was the only news that I consumed, I would be voting that way too. There is no information available on the other side that would motivate you to think any differently than to support those agents of power. And it really shifted my perspective on the question of how does this happen? And I want to recommend, if you haven't done this, to spend a week going to foxnews.com and comparing what is being said there and asking yourself, if this was the only thing I knew, what would I believe and how would I act? And if we could, as a society, address the divide of communication and information, we might get at least the average person to begin thinking differently. That won't necessarily change the immense power structures that are in place, but it certainly is helpful for me, and it motivates me to remain in dialogue, even with the people who I disagree with so deeply, because I want to understand, and I want us to have some mutual understanding to cultivate empathy with one another, so we could actually work together rather than to continue to build a divide that becomes deeper and wider every single day. So thank you everyone for coming, and let's open it up for some questions.
Let them know how to do that again, maybe.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, so you, at the bottom of your screen, you have a button to raise your hand. And if you do that, we will call on you. The hands come up on the screen in the order that they were raised. So we can just go down from top to bottom. So you will get your opportunity.
There is a comment on the chat.
Yeah, but that's different. We'll move on to that.
Geraldine Wilson has their hand up. Go ahead, Geraldine.
Hi, yeah, I'm Geraldine Wilson. I live in Dummerston. And I have a question for Tim. So, and I'm not sure I'm going to get this right, Tim, but at the end of what you said, you referred to the divide, and that if we didn't deal with the 50% of people that voted for Trump, we're not going to get anywhere. Maybe you have written down what it is you actually said, but I just thought, well, you said we won't move on. And I just wondered, well, what is it that we need to do?
Can you hear me? Okay, a good question. Thanks, Geraldine. Let me start off with just a quick clarifier, because I hear this on the mass media all the time, that 50% of the people voted for Trump. In fact, they didn't. If you look, there are two ways of looking at voting. One is called voter eligible population. Those are the people who were old enough, but also who have registered. Those are the eligible population. Then there's a voter age population, anybody 18 or over. If you look at the voter age population, the amount of people that actually supported Trump is about 25% of adults. Now that I know that may be small solace for those of us in the progressive community, but it is 25% is different. And we hear this all the time from the mass media than 50%. So I think that we have to get that language, that understanding out there. In terms of, well, in order to change society, you have to critique it. If you're not paying attention, if you're not pissed off, what's it go? If you're not pissed off, you're not paying attention. All right. And so what motivates me, and I know it motivates a lot of people on this panel, is that we have to dive into that critique. We have to raise a consciousness, not only for ourselves, but for those around us. And until we do that, then otherwise we just replicate the same patterns of thought, the same patterns of behavior. And we have to break that. We have to break that cycle. And what was always exciting for me in my career in the classroom was trying to get kids to open up and see a different point of view. Doesn't mean they had to look at my point of view or accept my point of view, but rather just, can we look at the world from a broader lens? And that's certainly what Steve is talking about. And I loved what Steve was saying. So so if we don't look at what we think or what I believe to be the real issues and of what we're faced with, we're not going to be able to move forward. I don't know if that helps at all, but thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Heather Cohen has their hand up.
Hi, everybody. I'm Heather Cohen. I teach at BUHS. Thanks for inviting me here. I teach social studies. And this semester I'm teaching an elections and government class. And I guess this question is for you, Tim, because they were talking this morning about the election, and one of the students was talking about how little their population, I think he's 17, how little his population and people he knows actually understand how government works. So they were wondering if maybe, some of these people who are still voting the way that they're voting for Trump or, Republicans, could have to do anything with not really understanding what they're voting for, because they don't know what these people do. So I don't know if I made my question clear, but that was sort of, I didn't really know how to answer that.
Okay, I'll respond this way, and then if you need, you can ask for clarifiers. We are products. We as in a democratic society, and I'm sorry to have to put that in quotes, the democratic part. We are products of the information that we receive. We now know that we have what is called tribalized or siloed news information. So I only go on CNN because I like their point of view. I only watch or listen to Fox because I know they're telling the truth. And so that's replicated throughout the society. And that is, to me, is a fundamental assault on the notion of a free society. It was Jefferson that said, well, if I had a choice between a free press and a free government, what would I choose? And you know the answer to this. I would choose a free press, because you can't have a free government without having a free press. And I would say either because of by choice, individual choice, that they're going to go to those sources of information that make them feel good, or it's feel versus fact, and not to make the effort to go beyond that and to do what Steve was recommending, even though it's a bold and audacious thing to do a week of Fox News. mean, I actually do when I get on the internet, I'll read some of their, or click on some of their stories, and it's a different universe. It absolutely is a different universe. There's some powerful studies done by some recent scholarship on the manipulation and the propaganda of Fox News. And I can find the book here somewhere. But I really recommend that if you, in terms of getting that kind of that media literacy, because we don't have it in our society. We don't have the ability to critique. We don't have the ability to question. And that goes across the board in terms of age groups. So I don't know if that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, great. So Cordelia.
Hi, I would like to ask about the shadow docket, which is something I am embarrassingly just learned about from my dad. And so I would just, and this question is for him or, you know, anyone else who wants to jump in, but I just want to know, like, hear more about it, and also so everyone else on the Zoom can understand, because I think it's something that's been bothering me since I first learned of it. I mean, the name alone, shadow docket, is really sketchy. So yeah, I'd like to talk about that.
All right, I can, but I don't know if anybody else, I don't want to dominate this.
Go ahead, Van.
Okay, the docket is what comes before the Supreme Court. So that's, the docket means the calendar. And there are two calendars. One is called the merits calendar, and that's the kind of things that we know about. Okay, the cases that are coming before us, the ones that are before the court, and they deliberate, they have give and take, and then they write their opinions. Shadow docket is something that has emerged in the last, I'd say about 30 years. And what it is, it's any application that is deemed to be, to the court, deemed to be an emergency application. It really first started, and it had to do with timing. Okay, if we don't act on this quickly, the damage will be done. We can't remedy whatever it is. And it really came about first having to do with deadlines for capital punishment cases, where the court had to rule on a case, let's say in 2 days, because otherwise the person may be executed in a state court. And so that became a kind of a new method of adjudication. And so what has happened is that the Trump administration in the last 3.5 years has used the shadow docket to force through, without deliberation, issues, particularly around voter suppression, around elections, and so forth. I'll give you an example. The shadow, these emergency applications during the 16 years of the Bush administration and the Obama administration, the shadow docket was only used 8 times. In 3.5 years under Trump, it's been used 36 times. And basically what it is, it's an end run around a judicial system in terms of allowing for a full airing and hearing of an issue. And one of the promoters of this has been a guy named Kavanaugh. And I do believe that is one of the most destructive, undermining, anti-democratic functions of our emerging court, as we're seeing it in the hands of deep conservatives. So that's it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Charles.
All right, this is more of an observation, and maybe you all can give the feedback based off of it. But from my observations, this past election has primarily been around instigating fear and quelling fears. Obviously one side rather than the other. And my first time voting was back for Obama's second term, and that was obviously after his first run, which is based off hope. What other side you were on, but it's more so being a young individual in this world, I have no real recollection of real like despotic or totalitarianism. I know you can't see me, but I just used air quotes in that regard, of that being a fundamental part of the election cycle, as well as the democratic process, however you want to put it. And fear is an interesting motivator, as well as I see it in a lot of my friends on the right who at least voted for the current administration and who voted for him again this year or not. But it's also the same thing on the opposite side, where I have friends that it's unfathomable, I'm scared. This is completely and utterly disturbing. And as a, again, somewhat young individual, it's disturbing coming from what we preach is the gold standard in democracy worldwide, but this is the standard at which some countries live in or have been living in for centuries, if not just the past couple of decades. And it's interesting how we've transitioned to that within not even a decade, but we started to see this type of transition to, I don't say fake news, but this type of attention of like the absurdist claims of birtherism to the legitimacy of other aspects. And it's just, I want to know what I don't say the consensus, but what the feelings are about, is this going to be a continued trend, or is this just a temporary blip on the radar?
Good question.
Should be the topic of the next.
Yeah. I won't respond to that. It's a hell of a great question. I'm interested to hear from other people.
I'll just very quickly, thank you, Charles, for bringing that up, and agree with you that fear is an extremely powerful tool that is manipulated by people in power. And while you're aware of recent utilizations of that, I think Nick could jump in and sort of explain that this has been a tool that's been used for a very long time.
It's a basic tool, right? It's the basic tool. If you become a thinker and a philosopher, or just a thinker about politics historically, Machiavelli is maybe the place you kind of start if you're in the Western world. And fear is the primary mechanism for garnering support from a political perspective. So Charles, get used to it, I suppose, is like the kind of the harsh way to put it. The question is, who uses fear and to what end? And you know, my favorite, I think he is definitively my favorite president in the United States, was Franklin Roosevelt. And he posited that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And that, still cliche like as it sounds, it rings completely true. So as you carry forward and as you speak to your friends, I would, while I don't, you know, it's a wonderful phrase and it's great to say every time you say it, just think about it and, you know, and, you know, riff on it the way it comes naturally to you, but it's never going to go away. That's to say, the use of fear to manage and manipulate society and individuals. And so just like any bully, and we got one in the White House right now, you have to stand up to it. And you have to stand up to the, and you can't, yeah, anyway, I'm going to end right there.
I want to draw people's attention to Mary's comment in the chat. If you didn't see it, and invite Mary in to add to the response to Charles's question, if you'd like.
Thanks, Steve. I'm just finishing another shout out. So I want to just make the distinction, because I've been told that throwing around the language of white supremacy versus like white supremacy culture can be confusing, but also oftentimes a trigger for those of us who are white and want to say, well, I'm not a white supremacist and I'm not a racist. So I want to talk about how this idea of culture, a white supremacy culture, is looking at the ways that norms and policies, practices, rules, if you will, are accepted and have been crafted by a system that was based on dominant Western Euro ways of behaving, ways of speaking, ways of thinking that are all part of our culture. So I was just thinking when Spoon put in this question about thinking about how select boards, and I see this in Winchester, right? Like, you know, decisions can't be made if you can't even bring up a topic unless it's on the warrant agenda. To me, that's so much a part of white supremacy culture. So this is a more like 30,000 foot conversation, I think, but I've been thinking a lot about what really needs to happen. And I think a lot of my comrades here would agree is we need a rethinking of the system, of the structures around governing and governance. So if you are somebody who comes from a culture that is much more collaborative, cooperative, where that's more, that's less patriarchal, that is, I don't even know what's the other word for that, not hierarchical, right? If you're if you come from a cultural perspective or identity where there is value in bringing shared perspectives to the table and making sure that voices who are not typically centered are centered, then a lot of what we're talking about is antithetical to somebody who doesn't come from a white Western Euro perspective. So I'm talking kind of like way out here, but I'm just thinking as we're talking about democracy and also the ways in which decisions and governance happens. I mean, we're very fortunate in parts of New England where we have town meeting, right? So citizens can bring forward and represent their opinions and perspectives and be part of the process. That's very, I mean, I worry that we don't understand the value of that. So I'm sorry, I'm speaking in different places here, but I did want to just say that I think if we understand that there is a dominant cultural way that we think about governance and who gets to be centered in the conversation, then there's no wonder that when we go back to the top of the chat, when somebody asked, you know, about what is democracy, the question is, can all of these things live? Can poverty and hunger and racism and these dominant practices, you know, do we have a democracy? Like sometimes I think, have I just been fooled? I'll stop there. Check.
All right, we don't have any more hands up. And Woody, how are we doing with time?
1:37 right now. We have plenty of time for more comments or discussion. It's up to everyone.
What's Mary got going in there? Mary has something in there?
Wasn't there a message to me?
Yeah, the dominant culture norm shapes how these practices, policies, and rules are crafted and enacted. And Geraldine Wilson just raised her hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Mary, I really appreciate what you just described, and it makes me think about how in our culture the individual is held up on such a pedestal. I mean, to such a degree that we can't even really understand the impact of that. You know, we're not a group culture. We're not a collaborative, cooperative culture. We're a culture of individuals where creativity is all about an individual's creativity. You know, every part of our culture, at the heart of it is this individualism. So I don't know how, I mean, when people say, well, we need to change the structure, I don't know. I'd like to be hopeful that we can, but I don't know how you change something that's that deep.
Yes.
Heather?
I just want to go on a little bit with that a little bit because I don't know if I can say this right. It's getting too late for me. But just the idea of capitalism creating individualism. So where capitalism and democracy just they're like oil and water. It seems like to me we're founded on this democracy and we're founded on this capitalism idea. In order to make money, you have to be out for yourself. And it feels like capitalism is make money. It's not about a collective workings together, and again, that whole social Darwinism idea of, sure, you can do it in democracy, you work hard and you can, but it really ends up being the survival of the richest because they're all out for themselves. I don't really have a question, I guess. I just wanted to comment on that. I just don't know how to change that. Like, it just seems like it's getting worse and worse with those two.
Can I respond a little bit to that? Can you hear me?
Yes, please
Tim,
do.
go on.
Yes, sorry, I was muted.
All right. The very nature of our economic system, the very values, the very structures that we have are work against the notion of cooperation, against community. It is we have this deeply ingrained the yeoman farmer, the rugged individualist, and that's been in our history from the very beginning, and it has that myth is as strong today as it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago. So you have an economic system that's based on, well, competition. Can I beat the competition? We have an economic system that puts private property over people. We have an economic system that says we have to have profit. And if we don't have profit, we don't exist. And so these fundamentals are absolutely antithetical to how, in my conception of a democratic socialist society, it should function. Because all of those notions of competition, and I'll put it in the raw form of greed, undermine the values that I think most of us, at least in this room, this Zoom room, hold to. And that's why we're here. That's why we're discussing this. And so that, in my view, we have to alter that. And one of the ways you can do it is you're going to have to alter the electoral system. And what would be one of the goals? Well, I wouldn't have a problem living in a society, or I'd have less problem living in a society such as these democratic socialist states in Northern Europe, whereas healthcare, jobs, employment, housing, education, all of these things are a right. They're not a privilege. Everything here that we get is a privilege, with the exception of they're not. It's not a right. And so that's the society I think we need to. That I've been fighting for all my life, and I'm going to continue doing that. So there.
I'll just jump in quick. I appreciate Geraldine, and I think it was someone who was asking about, so when, so what do we do about this, right? What do we do about this idea of how a culture the foundation of a culture is, I forget what they taught me in intercultural communication, but it was like high context, low context. If we have any SIT people here. All right, high context, low context. So I think more about power. I think we can, I don't want to say this. because I'm really interested in some of the questions that are coming up in the chat from Spoon around, what are some of the assumptions that we're making about the meaning or philosophical basis of democracy? I think what we really need to talk about is power and where power lies. And so we could say, well, look, there's ways that in some of these nations, and we were talking in the chat about, nations of Africa, where they have a cultural norm, right? Where there's a dominant culture. But my question is, I think, where does power lie? Where does colonization and systems of oppression lie in the context of that particular culture? And I think there's plenty of examples, and some of you can cite them better than I can. India, Ireland, where we saw, in fact, that not based on a racial construct, but certainly a class construct, where power was taken away from a people. So, for me, I think if I talk about this, even at the local level, even in the community level, like right here on my street, I think a lot about perceptions of power, who has power, who's perceived as having it. And if we do have it, just because we benefit from the system of privilege and power, what is my responsibility in understanding how I'm benefiting? And there's so many unconscious ways that I can't even understand that. So when I was talking about whose voices get centered in the conversation, I love the work of Stacey Abrams right now, because Stacey Abrams she's not even dealing with white people. She's like, let's look at where let's look at how democracy is not being enacted in terms of voter rights. And she's going right to the heart of it. And she's looking at how to dismantle voter suppression. So I'll stop there.
I'd like to say, I mean, again, it's kind of sort of superficial, but you remember the old phrase, power comes out of the barrel of a gun. And the other aspect of the other source of power is out of the masses. And so we really have two choices. You literally pick up the gun, or you generate a social movement. Social movements, which Black Lives Matter is a social movement. Stacey Abrams is plugged into it. She doesn't talk to white people because they're not. Why do it? Why bother yourself? We have to generate a massive, and I think, everybody, well, many people are aware that by roughly around 2042, white people will be a minority. Well, certainly that creates, by definition, if you get a social movement together that is the majority to begin with, then you can start to imagine restructuring the system and its values and its, and how power is distributed and how rewards are distributed. But we don't have, and the other thing about the gun is money. Money is the gun too. So we sitting in this Zoom room neither have money, and we don't want to pick up the gun. So we just got to go through the social movement. And that's that's our inspiration. That's what we got to, and it's not easy. And all of us, probably many of us, if not all of us, have worked hard to generate more and more enthusiasm for social progress by using people. It's a very difficult and elusive project.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I've always felt that teaching history was a nonviolent weapon. And what can we learn from the past? And then how can we use those aspects of the past to help us look forward? Other comments, observations?
Come on, people.
Well, so this is Geraldine again. Tim, I would say that accurate history is a non-violent weapon.
Yes, right. Yes, indeed. Yes. And if you listen to me, you're just going to get the truth, right?
All right, Cordelia.
Shoot, I just got a little derailed, but I think, and this is just a comment, which is that I think what's been so challenging psychologically and emotionally is that, you know, if we can't look at our past and realize our mistakes and change that to move forward, you know, how do we move forward and make a better future and life for everyone? But it just seems like with, you know, the more outspoken white supremacy that we're seeing, these people don't want to move forward and make the changes for humanity to be better. So it's just that I think is something that's really disheartening and makes it very challenging to be optimistic and positive about, you know, a more equal future.
Yeah.
Delia, that's so well said. I mean, I've had so many people in the last few days, particularly as we're seeing, you know, much more sort of unleashed examples of this, and we've been seeing it for a while. You know, what do we do with that? You know, and I have to say, I mean, what I hope, and I have been known to disagree with the Attorney General in Vermont, with TJ Donovan, but you know, there are laws and there are protections, and you know, it's one thing when someone has a perspective or an ideology. It's another thing when it gets put into practice where they use violence as a way to perpetuate that ideology. So I think on my street, I can deal with some of those folks because we can have a conversation. But when it crosses a particular line, then, you know, I want to believe that there are protections for that. And I will say, you know, and some of you know this, that I've been very dismayed with TJ Donovan and some of his decisions to not pursue some of the white supremacist activity that's happening in the state of Vermont, particularly when it happened against Kaya Morris. He made a decision not to take that case because he was afraid he would lose. And what many of us said to him was, you take the case, even if you're going to lose, because you're making on principle, you are saying to these folks, this is unacceptable. This behavior will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. So I want to believe that there are protections depending on what state we're in and who are the defenders of that. But, you know, when you look at the Attorney General, he is the highest law enforcement officer. And what we need to be doing, and I keep bringing it back to this local level for me, because that's where I feel like I can be sane, is holding those folks accountable. Holding folks who are in those positions, who took an oath and say they are pacifists, or say they are not necessarily pacifists, that's too much, but say that they are, you know, supporters of peaceful protests, et cetera, but won't support white supremacist activity. We need to be holding folks accountable, and our voices collectively really matter when we do that.
We see Neil. We see
Neil?
Neil Senior. Speak up. Are you muted, Neil? I think he's muted.
Neil, we can't ask you.
No.
You need to unmute yourself.
Stephen will tell him how to do it. It's in the lower.
He'll do it. There he goes. Oh, there he goes. There he is. Hi, Neil.
Your microphone isn't working, Neil. Or check to see if your computer is muted. Sometimes I'll forget to do that. So you can mute this and you can also mute your computer.
Anybody else have a question or a comment?
I do.
All right, Woody.
I do have a question. I was just looking at Spoon's question. I like these sort of theoretical, I don't know if you could even call them philosophical discussions, but Spoon said, my assertion that as long as we have poverty, hunger, racism, etc., we do not have a democracy. And he said that needs to be explored. I'd like to just touch on that a little bit, because by saying, first of all, democracy comes from the Greek, and the literal translation of the Greek word democracy is people rule. And that's big. That's really big. Well, the people have never ruled, but it's a wonderful dream. It's a wonderful aspiration. It's something to look forward to. And I'm not sure that democracy is the way it's going to happen, but it's worth making it happen. So how do the people rule? How can the people rule? It hasn't happened yet. How can it happen? Is it a matter of changing our minds, as we've been talking about? I don't know, but the people obviously are in the majority. And so in that sense, the people do rule, but their power, their majority is not acknowledged. That's as far as I can go.
Woody, can I jump in?
Sure.
I've been fascinated by, we had 8 years of a decent, civilized human being as a president, Obama. Didn't agree with his policies or his strategies, but he is fundamentally a decent human being, thoughtful, intelligent, articulate, all the things that I want in a leader in terms of those characteristics. And then we transition to the antithetical, the worst, the nadir of it, not Ralph Nader, but the bottom of the model, of the leadership models. So, but how much has the country changed? Has it just transitioned from Obama values to Trump values? I don't think it has. I don't think it's changed that much. But what happens is in leadership, and this is what I find fascinating, that leadership enables and empowers the goodness to come out, or the evil, the darkness to come out. From the light of Obama to the darkness of what we have now. And once we get back into the light, and I think Biden can do that. I'm no big fan of his, but I sure as hell want him. And I think he can bring more light to us. And it's within that environment of light, of optimism, of humanity. That's where we can build. That's how we as organizers can continue to reach out to other people across that great divide. And I'm right now, I'm going to be optimistic that within 12 hours, we may have a new president, and build and expand on that light to bring out the goodness that's in us, that it is really there. And it's really the classic yin and yang of the Rousseauian view of the world, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, that human nature, humans by their very nature are positive, are good, are kind, versus the Thomas Hobbesian view of that we are dark, we are evil, we are greedy. Well, I've always gone to the light of Rousseau, and I think I would say most of humanity is on the side of Rousseau. Other comments, questions, observations? I heard an interesting thing this morning from Hakeem Jeffries, a person of color who's a member of the United States House of Representatives from New York. And he was questioned about, well, what happened to the blue wave? What happened to Democrats who were supposed to have this phenomenal blue wave? Well, what he pointed out was that in the 30 most hotly contested races where the Republicans gained gained some seats, just happened to be in the most gerrymandered, most voter suppressed districts in the country. And so that long range strategy that has been going on for 20 years or more paid off in preventing a more wholesale shift to the values that we hold to be true. And the mass media doesn't talk about it. It says they're criticizing they just criticize the Democrats, and I don't mind criticizing Democrats, but let's get more of a perspective on this.
I have to sign off because I need to sign off. But I guess one shout out that I just want to, and I think I've said this a little bit tonight, and I'm saying this over here across the river from New Hampshire, where we have a lot of our own problems, particularly as we look at the Free Stater movement that is taking root, as we look at pockets of white militias, and we also look at our governor, who's a businessman and not a humanist. I'm curious what your thoughts are, how some of you are feeling about what the results have how you have fared the results in Vermont. It's very interesting to me to kind of look at all of that, particularly because a lot of my work is over in Vermont, and how you're reconciling some of that as we think about how we move forward. And I see that some folks are checking out, which is great. I'm just putting that out rhetorically, but really thinking about what is the canvas with which we need to work from, given where we are. You've got some seats that are flipped, to Republican. You've lost the Speaker of the House, who was somebody who spoke for, $15 an hour wage. I mean, it's going to be interesting times how things get negotiated in our states up here.
I found it interesting that, I guess we knew that Phil Scott would get reelected, because I think this was mentioned earlier. But how he got reelected, why he got reelected, I still try to figure out. I guess lots of people said, well, he handled the pandemic so well. And so that was the reason that they voted for him, because the pandemic's still happening and they didn't want a change of power during such a serious concern. That's what I've been told by the people I've talked to, but it just that's going to go and he's going to be there. And so I don't know, for a state that's so, I guess, Bernie Sanders, and then they go with Phil Scott. I don't know. I'll throw that out there. I'm struggling to understand all that too.
We've always been a schizophrenic state. It's not unusual to elect a Democrat for governor and a Republican for a lieutenant governor, or vice versa. And part of that, I know that there's this kind of this curmudgeonly Vermonter way of, well, we're not going to give you all all the power to one party. So we feel like we like hedging our bets. And that, if you look at that over time, it's not unusual to have that in our political history. Well, maybe it's time.
It does seem that way.
Yeah.
It's been a really wonderful conversation, wonderful meeting. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending. And I would like to say that this this video will be on BCTV, and the audio will be on WBEW. So keep an eye out for it. And we hope to do more of these meetings.